how they affect us. You know, the haze, the pink cloud, letting go. How did you spend your self-isolation? You know, social distancing has turned into a form of isolation. The next is maybe working with triggers. I mean, isolation, as far as a label, there are triggers that can send you in a different direction, totally. If you're not aware of what that is, and that can be, you know, loneliness. I remember somebody said in Seattle, Robin Briere, kind of got me into the recovery movement in '96. His girlfriend, my dear friend, and they've been family friends for 3 generations. She took her life, and Robin made it to church, and he asked me if he could share, and I said, yeah, you can. He grabbed the mic, and big, strapping guy, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, Marcus, wrapping it up, thank you for letting me share, about 500 people out there. I wanted to be here tonight. My name's Robin Briere, because when I'm at home alone, I'm in the presence of a madman. Thank you very much. And he sat down. It was very quiet. I think sometimes, you know, we are at home alone. We're not in the presence of the best company. Sometimes. If you're in the recovery community, it can really start to work on you. And that's why I've been trying to reach out, make some calls. I know you have done that to people. So I think isolation is we're going to deal with triggers, a whole new level of trigger. I can't remember a time in my life where we have, in a state. Now, I've lived overseas in Europe. I've been in Central America. I've been in Asia, where there were police states and you couldn't travel. But in the United States of America, I can't remember a time when we just were placed in a situation of social distancing like this. No. So I think in the future, for recovery, too much alone time might be a trigger.
Absolutely.
And ours is a weekly gap. We're trying to fill that.
Yeah, and we're trying to fill it with about 90 minutes worth of content, which is helpful for those 90 minutes. And hopefully it gives the folks that are paying attention today and tomorrow or wherever they pick the message up at, some things to think about to be able to fill up more time as we continue to move forward through this process. You've probably seen in the last week or so that, you know, there's changes. We're going to open up the economy. We're going to get back to our normal way of life. Marcus mentioned it a few minutes ago. I think we both agree on this. Normal has a new definition.
Yeah.
As much as I hate to use the tag the new norm, it really is going to be a new normal for a while. I think there's a general belief out there amongst most Americans that, you know, we're just going to be, you know, the starter pistol's going to fire, the race is off, and we're going to go right back to doing what we were doing before. Yeah. When I don't really think that's going to be the reality. And what I'm really hoping for is that people don't have that aftershock when we go another month with some form of isolation. And then we get into the summer months with some forms of isolation, because it's entirely possible that those things are going to happen. None of us know the answers. None of us know where it's going to go.
No. I think that normal is going to need to be in air quotes, you know, whenever you're talking normal, because some people have lost people during this, and loss is a trigger. Yeah. Some people have lost their job in the recovery community. Some people, maybe we know of some people who have had speed bumps with their health. I mean, they've lost their physical energy to be able to approach some things. So I think that's the next is, how will we deal with the new normal in the recovery community? One is, we'll probably be having Facebook Live and YouTube as a way of reaching people at certain times. For teaching, we'll be having them out there for people to watch. You know, if you're like some of us, you're up at midnight or 1 thinking about the next day, you can click on that and be able to have it and watch it if it's a benefit to you. So human labels are a big deal. They impact us. Not everybody likes a label, you know. I mean, there's also a label for people that don't like labels, and that's just kind of, if you're doing grocery shopping, you know, they refer to it as generic. But I think people are going to push back against some labels in the next phase of things, especially if distancing, they might want more than one weekly gathering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once a week might not be enough for people who are having some challenges in that aspect. So we'll be talking about that. So human labels, Greenfield, Brianna Soap from the very regal First Presbyterian Church, where we host every Tuesday evening. I'm here with Dave Carver, a member of Team Hope. I'm Marcus Dennis. Cheryl Gray leads hospitality. She's just shared with us some exciting things. We're back to human labels. Labels, whether we like it or not, they define us. We are a recovery movement at Brianna's Hope. That in itself is a label. Human labels, Dave Carver and Marcus Dennis. So Dave, we're talking about the next level of labels, if you will, the kind that, the human labels. How they guide us, how we deal with them. Can you think of a label that's going to be born out of this coronavirus era?
Isolationist.
Yeah. An isolationist is going to be a label.
Some of you actually may embrace isolationism. I'm kind of like that. I'm very social by nature, but when I'm at home, I don't want to deal with human beings.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are like that by nature. Once they're in their safe place, their spot. So I'm kind of an isolationist when I'm at home. In fact, I'm so much so an isolationist that there are times where my wife will ask, "Don't you ever want to leave that chair?" And the answer is no, I really don't. You know, it is what it is when you're there at home. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that's going to come out of this. I think there's a lot of things that are going to come out of the new norm for all of us. Because some of us don't realize that right now that there are new labels being formed about you.
Yeah.
You're forming your own labels about yourself at this point in life. If you're struggling and trying to recover at this point in your recovery, or just in your everyday life like we all are. We're all coming up with new labels, new names. It seems to be the way the human spirit works is, you know, we like everything to be compartmentalized. We like to be able to say, you know, from a church standpoint, you know, those are the Zionists and those are the Jews and, you know, those are the Pharisees. You know, well, these labels have been around for years.
Sometimes I think labels make it easier on the one that puts the label out there.
Absolutely.
I mean, if they can say like, well, there's an addict, or, you know, but what level? They don't even know what they're addicted to. We had our friend Glenn we mentioned. He got a tag. If you were a first-time visitor, you know, you could have thought that was for anything. But it was for fitness, and it was for, you know, over-snacking, just maybe like subconscious eating. I don't know what you call it. But he wanted to be on a different trail. It wasn't for anything else. So sometimes those labels, like you think about alcoholism, you know, we've talked about that in one of our aspects. The question we ask, you know, do any of you think that alcoholism or drug abuse is a deviant behavior? You know,
that was a huge trigger topic that we had, which is why we brought it up again tonight in this session as we continue to move forward with these sessions, because it seemed to trigger the whole room.
Yeah.
We had some of the best feedback that we've had in any of our meetings once we threw that out there, and primarily it's because of the word deviant. And I will take a little credit for that, because when I wrote it, I knew the word deviant was going to probably tick off a lot of people, because everybody has a different view of what deviant means. But from a medicine standpoint or a psychological standpoint, you know, deviant is deviant from the norm, which is what I was asking about. And it inspired a lot of people to think it. So Marcus said it again a minute ago, but the question is, do any of you think that alcoholism or drug abuse is a deviant behavior? You know, that should inspire you to think, well, what do you mean by deviant? Deviant from what? Well, deviant from the norm is where we were going with that part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. I drink. I like to drink, but I don't drink to abuse, that kind of stuff. In fact, I just went past, I did something different this time around. I started a thing about 3 weeks ago just to see where I was at, and I test myself from time to time, and I'm sure that alcoholics are probably going to reach out to me and say, well, you're on the beginning stages if you're worried about it, but
Nice.
you know, every once in a while I shut everything down just to make sure that I'm not in need.
Yeah.
And I just did 18 days I haven't had alcohol for 18 days, haven't had a single drink for 18 days. I will tell you that, you know, yesterday was not a good day for me health-wise. My back's acting up. I threw my back out years ago as a law enforcement officer, and I was in a lot of pain yesterday. I broke the 18-day string last night when I had a couple ounces of bourbon just to try to calm the pain down a little bit before I laid down. So I get it. There's many of you in the watch or listening audience or watching audience for that matter, that maybe that's how you started. Maybe it's a normal thing for you to have a drink here and there just to calm down.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about that before. When I used to write training programs, I would have a drink sometimes at night just to get my mind to slow down enough for me to go to sleep.
Yeah.
So I can really relate to that with people that have been labeled as an addict or an alcoholic or a deviant because of their behavior.
We've segued to deviant behavior, and another segue is if someone believes that they are in a deviant behavior. In the past, when we talked about this, if you are, then you can come up with, let me say, labels can be triggers. I'll give you one. Crazy. I mean, if someone calls someone else crazy, and I know you're looking at me, but I'm saying though, if you call somebody crazy, well, you and I have served as public officials in our life. Could be like a quart of gasoline, not just a label. You can have labeled triggers.
Absolutely.
And that's one of them.
Well, that's the reason that we do that, and I mentioned it a few minutes ago, but the reason that we as humans do that, at least I learned it when I was a law enforcement officer, when you give that person that label, you kind of put them in a box. And then once you've defined that box, you have a set of standards or protocols or things that you can do to solve the problem within that box.
Yeah.
So a lot of times as a young officer, I can tell you back in the 80s when I first started, mid to late 80s when I first started as a police officer, the crazy label was out there.
Yeah.
There's a 10 code for anybody that follows law enforcement, 10 codes. 1096, it means crazy, mentally unstable. Well, over time, that label changed because society, doctors, nurses, lawyers, everything, we all came to a realization that, not everybody is crazy. There are some crazy people out there, don't get me wrong. They're just off the deep end, cuckoo nuts crazy. But the label was too strong. Yeah. So one of our friends is here with us, and we talked about this during the last session that we had on labeling, that I said, you're not crazy, you're an emotionally disturbed person. Because I know this person.
Oh, was that EDP?
Yes, EDP.
So you go from I'm going to tell you, recently I found one of these wrist bands, the rubber. Mm-hmm. So I grabbed it for one of my cords because it looked like a rubber band to me. But the wording on it was, "You so cray-cray." I know, it's not my normal vernacular.
It sounds better than "you so EDP."
Yeah,
right?
But what happens when you go from "you so cray-cray" to EDP? How do you think that helps out with that?
Well, I can tell you from a law enforcement standpoint, I can tell you from a medical standpoint, when the label changed, the thought process changed. An emotionally disturbed person to me means that that's a temporary state. It's something that I can, with whatever skills that I've gotten and education that I've picked up, help them through that emotional disturbance at that time.
Yeah. Crazy
was different. If you were labeled crazy, there was not a whole lot we could do. I can tell you from Indianapolis Police, and there's a lot of people here watching tonight from, Hancock County, Shelby County, Marion County, from all the places that we've touched. Back in my day, if you were labeled as crazy, there wasn't a whole lot I could do with you.
No.
The way that you dealt with a crazy person was you gave them a mental health detention, basically, which was a 72-hour hold.
Yeah.
Back then, it was called disorderly conduct ?
Yeah.
Because you didn't know why they were doing what they were doing, because we weren't trained to do that. So, you would take a person off the street that, was clearly having some problems and tag them with an arrest of, being a DOC, disorderly conduct ? And they went to Wishart Hospital. Mm-hmm. We called it the rubber room back then, another label that we stuck on things, but, they would go out there and a doctor would come and talk to them.
Even in high school, I served as an intern for a psychology professor at the hospital. At that point, they referred to it as, it's now closed on Washington
Central
Central
State?
State.
Yeah.
And I can say, going through all the doors, locks, and systems to get to the classroom, that in itself had a lot of connotations back then. I mean, Central State was thought of as the place, if you were sent there, that itself was a label, a serious label. Another label, in the recovery world, the last time we spoke, even criminal, it can be a label, but it can also be a behavior. When you think about people, they can mean that emotionally, not just literally. Like you're breaking a revised code, like criminal, but it was criminal, but you didn't get caught. That could be something we put on someone, and that causes people to be viewed differently.
True. And the interesting thing about the criminal part of it is that there is some criminal behavior that does happen with people that have the label of emotionally disturbed or crazy. But there's a realization nowadays that that was a contributing factor to the criminality part. Because otherwise they would be, normal, and I put that in air quotes for those of you that can't see today, normal air quotes. That's another label that, for otherwise they would be normal and they weren't out committing crimes. So I think law enforcement's come a long way. I think your communities that you live in have come a long way. I believe we had a really good conversation on it the last time about the number that everybody seemed to settle on was about 10 years behind.
Yeah.
And I think as a society, we are still several years behind, but we're a whole lot further ahead than we were in the 80s.
Yeah.
You're a child of the 80s. You're just a hair younger than me. I'm 56. It was a lot different back then. You did something criminally wrong and you were crazy, you got locked up. And you mentioned it a minute ago, at Central State Hospital, sometimes the level of craziness was dependent upon how many locked doors you were behind.
Yeah, I think to get to that room with that professor in my junior and senior of high school, I think I went through 5, and you talk about that movie that was in my mind. Of course, I was a young adult, a junior and senior in high school working there, but I was thinking about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest became a movie, but it was also a label. I'd heard people talking about that to people, but we have in our notes here that some of the labels carry a belief, as well as a behavior. So when you talk about crazy, that carries a belief with it. And sometimes saying that fosters the behavior. When you talk about triggers, which triggers can be a label too. When you think about how are people adjusting to their 40-some days of being at home? They're not in church, they're not around people. It just gets to a point where we're going to have a whole new set of labels when we come out of this.
Right.
And I think we're going to have to develop different mechanisms, even though, again, we have an epidemic, which is opioid and alcohol. We're also in a pandemic, and we're going to have to come up with a different lexicon when we talk about that. Maybe a COVID-19 tag for the people that made it through all the days with their recovery like this. So back to maybe asking people if you want to put some of the labels on the thread here for Facebook at Brianna's Hope, some of the labels that you have dealt with or worked through, or you think we will be seeing when we come through the end of this. Maybe we'd love to hear about them from you. I know we would, but maybe you could share some of them with us and think a little bit more about it. Kind of thinking more about where we were with these labels, maybe a reasonable reflection of where we are right now. In the 80s, we had pretty rough labels with people we thought that might be not totally there in themselves when they were dealing. I think we're better now. We have a lot of ways to tools, but the belief in also essentially in what is your essence? How does that relate to the label part?
Well, the thing about the labels with the essence is that labels carry with them a belief, and that's what Marcus is alluding to there, that a behavior reflects your essence. So essentially who that person is. Now, we all know that the labels that were handed to us were labels that were handed to us by somebody else as a way for them to be able to categorize who you are. Unfortunately, for some, especially for those that struggle with addiction, drug and alcohol abuse primarily, but there's plenty of other addictions out there, those labels were the box that we put ourselves in, and that box became our essence. Again, referring to a friend of ours who's here live with us, you know, once we broke the box and that person realized that she wasn't crazy, she's just emotionally disturbed, it gave her a safe place to work in.
It's okay, we got a courtesy smile out of that.
Yeah, and it is a good place to understand that.
Hey, I think EDP is a bump up from you so cray cray.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, myself, but I was just saying.
Well, the language sounds better for one.
The language is better. But also, I mean, I'm going to say if you live well and long, and I hope all of us do, we're all going to go through a season where we're probably not as emotionally at our best as we want to be. Like right now. I mean, if anybody, even healthy people, want to tell you, oh, it's okay, I can unplug from the world for 40 days and it will not affect me. Well, I think they might be stretching that. I mean, that's going to affect people. And that in itself is a label. I think loner is also going to be a new label. Maybe some people won't come out of this as easily as we hope they would. I think some people will enjoy this isolation so much, we may have to reach out to them to get them to the recovery groups.
Did we, and I'm sorry I stepped out of the room.
No, we're good.
Did we cover Brianna's prayer?
Thank you very much for asking me that question. Marcus and Dave, Greenfield Brianna's Hope, we're glad that you're joining us in every session of Brianna's Hope. This is Brianna Marie DeBaptiste. No matter where you meet, Indiana or Ohio, whatever you're under a tree or a steeple, you're in a community center, we always have Brianna's prayer, and we haven't had that yet. We've had some interruptions, but Dave's going to weave all this together for us, and we'll make one episode of all this.
That may have sounded a little choppy to you guys as to why did he interrupt him to bring up the prayer? Because I think we're there, and we're talking about a person's essence.
Yeah.
And the person that is driving the cause that we're sitting here working so hard tonight to work through you and share with you, that person, Brianna, as we're talking about essence, I really want you guys to think about essence as you hear this prayer and think about what we just talked about with labels. Because that's where the prayer hit me the most. And I think as we've done this, and I've been involved with this group now for about 6 months or so, as we continue to do these meetings day in and day out, we keep coming back to the essence. And the essence is, her essence is pretty clearly spelled out in the prayer. That essence is, and the prayer starts, please, Lord, look after me and my family. Please help me to do the right thing and to show people that I am not a bad person inside or out. And help me, Lord, to get through this disappointment again. And I know I make mistakes, but who doesn't? I don't do it to do wrong. I do it because I feel I have no other choice. I want a better life, Lord. I do. Please help me. Do to me as what you feel is best. I surrender to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So human labels, that's, what do you think some of the labels in that prayer that we read every week that we gather, Brianna's prayer? It seems like to me there's a couple labels that she was working through. Like, I know I make mistakes, and mistakes can be a label.
Yes.
You know, when someone says you've made a mistake, if you know it, that's one thing. If you don't, you're hearing it for the first time. But it seems like she is working through that, saying, I know that I make mistakes, but who doesn't? So sometimes labels are things we can shed. We don't have to live with them. And I think recovery itself is a label, you know. When we're in a recovery movement, we're in an epidemic in the midst of a pandemic that I think recovery takes on a new meaning. And you've developed some neat things here with human labels. What are some of the other labels? We've talked about crazy. That can bring up a lot. Also, criminal can be a label. You know.
Deviant in and of itself is a label.
Deviant's a label.
I remember when I was growing up, deviant behavior was almost always criminally based.
Yeah.
And there is an element of deviant behavior. In fact, there's still criminal laws on the book that talk about deviancy.
Yeah.
But the idea behind the word deviant was deviance from the norm.
Yeah.
And as we've stated several times in several different segments tonight, the norm is so out of whack these days that, what's deviant and what's not.
I think we've all deviated from the normal aspect of our lives during this. So in that way, you could say we've all deviated, but calling someone or referring to them as a deviant, I can say right now, that's all of us. We're deviated from life as we know it.
Absolutely, if you know what the norm is. Yeah. So that was the other thing that I try to get people to think about is, how do I know what the norm is? Well, it's a societal norm is basically what that terminology is referring to is what's the norm for society. But then that opens up a whole nother can of worms for all of us because of the conversation that we've had before about the facades in our life. There's a lot of things that go on behind the facades of the fronts of our homes and the door to our apartments or whatever that nobody knows about. People look like they're a normal family or they look like they're leading a normal, healthy, happy life. And, you end up with a mass shooting or, you end up with that person being arrested for drunken driving. And it's just such a shame because, I'm going to use you, for example. If that happened to you, it would be shocking. Yeah. Marcus got arrested for drunken driving. I mean, he was a great guy. The guy's he's a pastor and he's working with multiple churches and he's so dependable, what a mistake.
Yeah. Even respectable is a label.
Absolutely.
You think about tragedy aside, I think we lost a postal worker in Indianapolis yesterday just delivering the mail. She was shot, and I guess they're dealing with a lot of aggression because people are dependent on their mail. Maybe they're getting a stimulus check or different things. So I think respectable is a label. We have to look at what is respectable and maybe what's disrespectful behavior. We hope that when we can meet again as a group, that we're all coming back in a respectable way, and we can. You think we're coming back in 1 week, or do you think we're coming back in phases when we do come back as a recovery movement?
I think it's going to be phased back in. I think this group will be able to probably do it within a couple of weeks once they open things up, because we weren't a very large group.
Yeah.
And that's something for you folks out there that are looking in on us for the first time, or maybe you're watching what we do and you think, well, they're not a very big group. For us, it really doesn't focus on the numbers. And the way Brianna's Hope works for the entire state is it's really not focused on the numbers. It's focused on the person.
Yeah.
If we can help one person, that's better than not helping anybody at all. So back to your question, I think when we open up and we get a chance to reassemble, we'll be in pretty good shape as a group because we weren't overly large to begin with.
Yeah.
But I think what we're doing technology-wise and some of the things that even though we've had a lot of mistakes tonight that have nothing to do with us, it's just, the bandwidth that we're stuck with, and everybody's broadcasting, everybody's doing videos.
Yeah, we're on the waves more than we used to be. Not
Absolutely.
the waves with surfboards, but we're on the internet wave for sure. You're right. We have a goal. We had a goal. We still do in 2020. I'm going to tell you, we made a joke, the worst investment that you probably could have made in 2020 was buying a planner.
That's all we have tonight for part 2 of Human Labels, Addiction and Recovery. Thanks for tuning in and watching our message tonight. We hope you all have a safe week. We'll see you again next week.